This is deep dish, right?
Yeah, well, let's get deep.
So I'm going deep on both sides.
Alex, welcome to the platform. How you doing?
I'm good. Well, it's a beautiful day. It's a Chamber of Commerce day, so I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad that you're here, and I know the listeners and the viewers are glad that you're here so we can unpack this mayoral campaign. It's like 50 of you running.
Yeah, it's going to be the summer party, joke that people are just going to have a party and say, raise your hand if you're running for mayor, and there's going to be like 6 hands going up.
But no, like, I'm excited to get into this race with you, just your background and what you've done, but also just giving people an opportunity to hear from you, just unpack like what potentially Nashville would look like if elected mayor under your leadership. So I'm ready to get into it.
Let's do it.
And so I want to start off with just your priorities, right, that you have on your website.
Yeah.
I think it's important for everybody to just kind of unpack that, because people's priorities are different. That can mean different things to different people. And then we just kind of go through that and just untangle some other just current things that are happening in our state, but more specifically in our region.
Yeah.
And so for people who may not know, what would you say your top priorities is at the moment?
Yeah, no, and that's nice that you say at the moment, because I think like a lot of us, when Mayor Cooper decided not to run, I think a lot of folks looked at service to the city and service to their fellow citizens, and it is for those of us that are newer into the race, you will see some evolution in the priorities as we're moving forward. So I would say the way that I think is helpful to think about why running for mayor is to think about it, and you'd mentioned this is all about me, this show, but I actually think of running for mayor is all about the people in Nashville. And so the way that I frame what my priorities are going into this are really framed by what I hear and see across the county. And really, I think arching over all of it is putting the citizens who live here first in the way that we think about the work of city government. So some things I think about, earlier this year, I saw a news story about a woman who was mugged and beaten at 2:00 in the afternoon on a sunny day on West End Avenue, walking to her car in her parking lot. And I called her and I asked her, what do we need to know? And what do we need to know so that we can, if we know better, we can do better, right? And she, it takes a lot of bravery for a victim to speak up and to go onto the news. Her name's Lindsay. And she told me she didn't want Nashville to become the big city that she had moved here from. And she didn't want crime to become this accepted part of life. And so as we dug into that, what we see is that 2/3 of our crimes that are reported are never cleared. So what that means is that our criminals feel more emboldened and our victims feel more helpless. And actually, in some ways, both could stop even reporting crimes, right? So that persistent gap of that many that are reported but never cleared is probably growing. And we look at our officers, and I think the Nashville police force, it has been vaulted into the, all eyes of the world on our police force. They did such a remarkable job in the Covenant tragedy and their training, and you can see things that we don't always see every day, but we got to see it on display in that moment. But what is hidden there is that we're 200 officers short. And so what that means, and arguably we're probably more officers short than that. And so what that means for people like Lindsay is that this sort of helplessness and maybe this directionally of how are we going to pull that back, right? How are we going to increase our officer pay? That's part of it. But then how are we also going to think about resetting the way that we think of our police and just as public safety as a priority for the city?
Well, that's a good point. I'm glad that we touched on public safety and policing, because it's I guess depending on what side of the scale, because we know police affects a certain demographic, Black and brown and poor folks, a little differently than they do other folks, right? Immigrants or refugees and things like that. And so you get two different type of 3 or 4 different type of experiences when it comes to police. And so you have this buzzword, defund the police or reallocate funds for police. What are your thoughts on how the role of police, right? Should police officers, SROs be in schools, or should there be a different body there so police can like fight crime and do things on the street? Should they be militarized? Should they have these helicopters and all of these other things? Or should that money be places elsewhere where we know like people are unhoused? There shouldn't be police. People have mental health issues. Maybe that shouldn't be police.
Yeah. Well, I would I would offer that maybe in the world of buzzwords, I'd maybe like to start a new one for Nashville, which is to rethink our reset from a criminal justice system to a victims justice system. Okay. And I think that's part of when we think about the rights of victims, and their first question is they want to make sure that doesn't happen to someone else. And a lot of our victims advocates spend a tremendous amount of time working within the criminal justice system and within the education system because some criminals are themselves victims, right? Where they arrived to that place of committing a crime because they are the victim potentially of other crimes. And so, I mean, I think you're bigger, and I know you're saying to sort of unpack it. So you asked, I think you sort of put a bunch of pieces out there.
There's a lot of components, right? Just sticking on public safety, right?
Yeah.
We have criminalized in this state in general, right? We have criminalized homelessness, right? 30% of those incarcerated have a mental illness, right? And so how can we get those individuals to not be policed or not be jailed, right? And maybe as potential mayor, what are resources or what are things that we can do to combat or address things on the front end so police don't have to deal with it? Because I don't think it's necessarily a policing issue. They just end up doing the job, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. There are, meeting with our county's mental health and veterans court judge and going to some of the different mental health and veterans courts events that she has held. Judge Melissa Blackburn, who's a tremendous asset to our city. I think that we know there are roughly 180 individuals in Davidson County, to your point, who, given their mental health condition, are in this in-between place. They cannot actually be prosecuted for crimes because of their mental status, but they are not so badly off that they are committed to our Middle Tennessee mental health, or used to be called Clover Bottom facilities, right? So we only end up with this pretty sizable group of people that are kind of stuck. Is it messed up?
No, I'm always looking over it, and so I'm just always checking. So don't mind me. I'm just making sure it's not messed up.
So there, I think it is a question how there are within our homeless population a group that because of mental health and other issues, we probably will never find the permanent supportive housing frequently because we can't force them, right? There's a group of working poor or people who have fallen off in a difficult situation that I think we can lift up, and I think groups like the Contributor and others are able to find them a pathway to permanent supportive housing. But the question is, I think part of your question was mental health, and is there a place for police and mental health? I love Chief Swan, our fire chief, right now is working through with a number of different mental health and homeless groups a pilot program to look at how we're not having to send the entire fire truck and the entire ambulance, but sending a more directed mental health caseworker type of a person to assist in certain instances. And I think it's tricky because, right, you've also got your people on the front line to think about too, right? And you also have the person on the 911 call that is trying to make the call to say, is that somebody who we send a mental health advocate for, or is that someone that we send an EMS worker for, or somebody with a higher level of training, or is that someone who may become violent and we need to send someone from the police? So we do need to think about the rights and protecting the person undergoing that, having an episode or something that's going on that someone's calling 911. But we've also got to think about all of our public safety people too, right, who are being sent out. And if I'm the person running the 911 desk, I've got to think, did I make the right call, right? And then I think that's complicated. That's my husband was in the Army for about 20 years, and he was an Army doctor, deployed multiple times to Iraq. And I think when you start to see, cases, what you're getting at is like levels of triage for care. The difference is that when you're not in a war zone, you actually, I think our first response is, let's send everybody. But then if we're short officers, or if there's something across town, that is a higher level issue. I don't know. So
yeah, I think it's a lot to unpack, and I think it's many layers to it. But this potentially is mayor.
Yeah, but I would say the biggest single issue, though, overriding all of these pieces, is our literacy rate.
Okay.
Right? Our literacy rate, and we know this, right? And when you mentioned incarcerated individuals too, many of them cannot read.
Right.
Because we have failed them.
But Tennessee as a state, it's not the best state when it comes to literacy or education, unfortunately.
No, it's not. But we also, within our own metro public schools, we have some schools. You mentioned North Nashville, Purpose Prep in North Nashville. Mm-hmm. They have 2.5 times the number of kids, the same Black and brown kids from the same zip code in North Nashville, are reading at or above grade level.
Right.
And in a metro school in the same area,
right,
only 18 or 19% of those same kids are reading at grade level, right? And that makes you, and that should kind of make you angry, right?
But we know how to address it though. Like it just hasn't been. It's been neglected. North Nashville in general, but a lot of different parts, especially when we talk about Black and brown kids. Mm-hmm. We know just the resources, right, on the front end, the money, like the time, right? We looking at PTO or PTA funding and things like that. We can raise is different in different areas in our city where it's diverse, but it's diversity segregated, which means you also have diversity segregated income, right? That kind of pours into, okay, what type of education is going to happen at Pearl Cole versus which type of education is going to happen over here somewhere, or Whites Creek. And so and these are just historical things that have happened before my time, right?
Yeah.
That just has been neglected. I think we're in a place now, fortunately, where, especially with the growth, is where, we need a new engine in our city, but we trying to fix the new car with the oil change we should have done 20 years ago.
Why? I push back on that and go and maybe think of inviting them, but invite the principal of Purpose Prep here. Mm-hmm. Invite her, and she will tell you that it is, and that how we're teaching reading, and are we accepting that we're failing kids in a certain approach that we're using at some schools in teaching reading, and why is she getting results with the same kids at such a greater rate? Right. Or invite the literacy folks over from KIP, right, where 78% of their first graders are reading on grade level. Right. Why can't we achieve that everywhere? Because they're actually getting less money per student than our Metro Nashville public schools in the same zip code. They're getting less money and getting better results. So I would just say, if you had
charter public school.
Yeah, but if you had a football team down, but it shouldn't be a debate, right? If you had a football team down the street and their coach had a weight training regime and a sprinting regime that was working, right, you wouldn't say, I'm gonna say you're just special because you have special weights.
Right.
I would go and study that and say, how are you faster and better with the same number of hours in the day? And how can I get my team trained in that same way?
Right.
Right. And I think it's a sort of a shift, because there's a sense that says, let's just say, let's put up a barrier that says it's not possible here.
Right.
But now we've gotten so many places where we're saying it is possible here. Right. Same school, same water that we're drinking, same air that we're breathing. And I would ask us, I think Miami-Dade did that so incredibly. Alberto Carvalho, he's just left. He's now the superintendent in Los Angeles Unified. But he took an urban school system that was an F-rated school system. And instead of saying charter's bad, district good, He said, let me figure out what they're doing and let me own that these are all our city's kids.
Right.
And that if we actually train together, work together, learn together, we can lift it up. And he took that school district from an F-rated to an A-rated. And we've got actually a principal here in Metro Nashville who I think is being really studied, and you should invite him on too. He runs Warner Arts. His name is Ricky Gibbs. So traditional, school, and listen to him on, even sort of say like, hey, why are we making some of this harder than it needs to be? Right? Yeah.
I want to go back to, you mentioned like housing and stuff. I want to go back to affordability, right? And how that kind of plays a part in our growth, but also affordability and transit kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It'd be great for you to unpack like what that looks like to you if elected mayor of, are you for dedicated funding for transit? How do we put a mandate over this housing crisis that we need 30 to 40, 50,000 affordable housing units? And what does that even mean today? Is $900 a month affordable?
Yeah. So first I would say on the affordability question, we have hurt ourselves over the last 20 years by driving the city into debt. We actually have more debt in Davidson County than the entire state of Tennessee.
Okay.
We are the most taxed residents. So here's what happens with affordability. When we raised taxes, you've got, I talked to a property owner that had 15 units in Germantown. Our older housing stock is actually the most likely to be affordable, right? It's not built under newer standards. It's been around. Mortgage is a little bit more paid off, right? But when we come in and when we double the taxes, and I've got 14 units and my tax bill just went up $12,000, what happens? Everybody's rent goes up, right? And so like this fiction that affordability is solved by spending more is also missing the side about affordability of taxing less, right? How many people do you know who have said about their smaller business, yeah, I used to be on the line of Rutherford County and Davidson County, and my triple net lease, which includes the commercial taxes, got so high, I've gone across the county. And we'll start to see strip malls that are abandoned, right? We see strip malls abandoned, we see crime, we see the value of that property will decline, right? And then we'll be in a cycle that we've seen a lot of other big cities to go through. So I would say first on affordability, it is stepping back and saying, what are we doing as a city by making ourselves the most taxed city in the state, which is what we are.
Right.
Most taxed residents right here. So the other piece on housing stock, the solution is not, there are aspects of the solution, and you've said this, that maybe 300 or 400, 4,000 units might be able to solve through some of the different affordable housing programs that the current mayor and current council are proposing. But the other is frankly kind of Econ 101, right? Supply and demand.
Right.
If we don't build more housing and more diverse housing, more dense housing along our larger transit corridors, the price of housing is going to keep going up, right? So take Charlotte Pike, where I grew up, right? You can see now when you go from the Capitol out west, out Charlotte Pike, you can see apartment buildings coming up and coming online. We need to continue that rate of growth. And I know it makes people go like, uh-oh, she's saying like grow more. But actually, if the supply is constrained, the price is going to keep going up, right? So we've got to build more. We've got to use some of the tools that we have typically used in economic development to spur businesses to relocate here or jobs to stay here. We probably got to think about those to say, how can we think of some of those to help spur affordable housing? But it's mostly speed. And then the other issue on speed is also our permitting and our permitting backlog. If we're right now at about $5 billion of permits being pulled, meaning of real estate that's being built, it's taking 3-6 months longer. And every day that takes longer is a bigger cost, right? Because I'm borrowing that money. I'm not getting any rent. It's going to be baked into when I finally open that building. So we also have got to, I think, attack the bottlenecks that we've created ourselves in city government.
Man, how does that for you tie into, you talk about density a little bit.
Yeah.
How does that tie into transit, right?
Yep.
And being able to access places, go move around, possibly not have to have a car expense, but also just be able to like not have these jam ups, this traffic, and be able to move freely, more freely and more efficiently through the city, and also just through it would affect Middle Tennessee, I would think, as a whole. So the question comes up like, hey, referendum failed in 2018. Many people believe we still need that dedicated funding.
Yep, we do. Yeah.
And so one of the many people is like, are you for dedicated funding for transit?
Yeah. But you cannot, look, the mayor who tried to pass that, she never went to meet with the mayor of Williamson County. You cannot pass, I mean, he's a great mayor. He's been the mayor for probably 2 decades, right? Nashville cannot take a go-it-alone approach. Nashville cannot believe that Nashville is so much better than everyone else that we don't need their help. We are 1 in 10 Tennesseans. We're not 9 in 10.
Right.
That means we don't have the votes alone to get something done. The reason transit failed the first time, and it's fascinating because people say, oh, we don't know where those 40,000 voters came from. 40,000 people who don't typically come out to vote in municipal elections came out, and transit was defeated because they looked at it and said, hey, this idea of transit is one county, but I work in Williamson County, or I drop my kid off for, in somewhere in Rutherford County, or my hairdresser is in Sumner County. Like the idea that we're some kind of an island is completely false. I know everybody goes, oh, we're a blue island or a red state. We get to just do our own thing. That's not true, right? You failed.
The state lets you know that's not true.
No, but our citizens of Davidson County let us know that wasn't true. Transit failed in 2018 because we believed that we could just go it alone, right? So the chamber, one of their groups is called Moving Forward, the 2023 scorecard, which is your question about transit. Their number one priority is, maybe they should say this for themselves, but I think I've got this right. Not actually. Advocating for and secure dedicated funding for transit in the region, 23 to 27. That's in the next mayoral term. I have asked to have sort of a Gantt chart to say, like, if you wanted to get it done on this day, what would it take, right? And actually, I'm pretty confident. I mean, without dedicated transit funding, and you hear this a lot of these federal dollars are not accessible to us. So there's 25 regions, the top 25 regions in the state and the country. We're the only one that doesn't have it. So part of you in your mind goes, all right, well, we're missing out, right? That means, I think the numbers are that we would have 16 cents of local money and we could leverage 84 cents of federal money. So the way that I look at that is, who do we need to work with regionally, other county mayors? Who do we need to sort of plan together with? This is a single media market, right? People who watch the news and hear about a transit vote, the greater Nashville media market, let's have a sense of like a voting season, that a transit solution at about the same time, instead of saying like, because if we do this, it's just the Nashville vote, then Rutherford County folks will go, well, the Rutherford County mayor and his citizens are also stuck in traffic on 24. It's not just Davidson County, right? Yeah, so I think it's an absolutely you cannot take a go-it-alone approach, because when we do and when we did, we failed.
So how does that change with you being mayor? Like,
yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah, well, so I'm pretty confident. From my work with Governor Haslam in economic development, when we look at this idea of like, oh, who's got economic development experience, right? Regionally, and at the state level, our region has done really well. Davidson County, for median income earners here, has failed because every gain has been erased in how much we've raised taxes, right? So how would I work with a region? The way I actually don't know another way but to approach this regionally, right? I've never come from my head is only Davidson County. I've always thought of it as the state and as the region and what our place is.
Okay. No, that's awesome. I want to kind of pivot into like something just like a little more personal. Right?
Yeah.
You know, you have this elaborate background, city, state government working. You know, this world traveling experience as a teacher as well. Why run for mayor now? Why now? And what makes you better qualified than your opponents? Unpack that for us.
Yeah. Well,
this is where you talk your talk. This is
sure. Well, so why now? I think anyone who I'm a native of Nashville. I obviously chose to come back. My husband was in the Army for about 20 years. So 9 of those years of his 20 years of service, I was married to him. And so we were stationed in Brussels, Belgium. We were stationed in Washington, D.C. We were stationed in Colorado Springs. He deployed with the 101st to Iraq. He deployed with the 1st Cav. So he sat on the cold bleacher on Christmas Day at 3 a.m. when he came back from a 15-month deployment. And, you know, then you get that moment where the Army are done and they say, where do you want to go back to? It's called an ETS, not a PCS. And we ETS'd here to Nashville. This is my home. And I guess the first time I got to be in charge and not the Army, we got back. So that was 10 or 11 years ago, 2011. So 12 years ago, I guess. Time is flying. But why now? So stepping back and watching both the city's extreme financial distress, $8 billion of debt. This city, my great-grandfather worked for the railroad and helped create Radnor Lake. The tallest place in the city of Nashville is named for him, Gagnor Ridge at Radnor Lake. Part of it is also because he founded the Tennessee Ornithological Society. You can go down here on 4th and Union, there's a plaque. And so he's with the birds. He's at the tallest place in the city with the birds. And I think about moments where you can be called to serve. And this to me is a calling, that there are people in our city who feel not heard around issues like just basic everyday issues like I don't have a sidewalk. Why are we talking about building some new thing downtown when I don't have a sidewalk? I don't have a place that my kid can go to school and I can be guaranteed that they're going to read without winning the lottery or driving across town, right? I don't have I don't have a sense that as a victim of crime that I'm being heard. Right? I feel like somebody else is being heard. And so I think that there was this place to say, how do we start to reset a compact with our residents here to say this can be their home. We don't have to follow the march towards becoming a big city that becomes a shell of itself. And so that to me, this sort of sense of we're missing that voice and actually believe that there are enough people in Nashville that don't want to be in, they don't want to follow this slow march towards turning into Portland or turning into San Francisco. They want us to be Nashville.
Right. How do you, no, before I ask you that question,
what
makes you better qualified?
Yes. Well, I would say two things. My combination of state and federal experience, I have a very clear sense of what the job of mayor is and what it isn't, right? And then the second piece is my entrepreneurial experience, right? And building and growing rapidly scaling companies, right? Taking multiple companies from, 55 employees to 140 employees, $8 million in revenues in 20 countries to, 30 million in 50 countries, right? And that's sort of a, like, let's get it done and get it done now. That has always driven me. I think that combination is pretty distinct.
What is that? I'm glad you said that so people can have a clear understanding on what that means to you. What is the job?
Yeah. So the job of mayor is first Public safety. Yeah. It's second, it is, and most importantly, is creating a balanced and sound budget. The budget is the reflection of our priorities.
Okay.
Right now, I think it's actually a little bit insulting that our council's kind of current approach is to wander around and ask people about participatory budgeting of like, what do we think of 10 or $20 million of the city budget? Nobody ever asked us if we should be spending $411 million a year on debt service. Nobody ever asked us if we should become the most taxed residents in the state.
Right.
Nobody ever asked us if we should have more debt in Davidson County than the whole state put together.
Right. Okay.
Did they ever ask you that?
No.
Yeah, I know. Like, in a way, it's a little bit like, oh, let's give you this shiny object over here to distract you so we can make you feel like you had a say in what we're doing. But at the same time, we're over here and we are over a period of 20 years with a hand in the cookie jar crowd who wants desperately to stay in charge.
Right.
Making some decisions that have really driven us to right now. You know, you talk about things like mental health. We're spending 40 times the amount of money that we're spending on all of our social services. We're spending on servicing our debt.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow. So, speaking of the council,
Yeah.
we're still at 40 right now.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, feelings,
Mhm.
especially as a potential mayor going forward, of having a 20-person council versus a 40-person council?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I've said, and this is a continually evolving situation, right? But I think I've said that, I mean, the most conservative position is for locals to decide how they should be governed, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So we had an opportunity 7 or 8 years ago to vote on making the council smaller. I voted for it to be smaller just from like a fiscal sanity and operational perspective. It lost. I'm a believer, if you lose, you lose. The difference, though, is that if we believe that's a good idea, let's bring it back to the voters, right? So think about how many times the first time we've taken something to the voters, it's failed.
Right.
Wine in grocery stores. A lot of your listeners may not know if they're new to Nashville. That took like 12 years to get that through. All the like locals and the state and the everything. I mean, you could not buy wine in grocery store 6 years ago. And people who are new are like, nah, that's not true. Right? And so even a popular former mayor, Mayor Bredesen, it took him twice to win to be governor.
Right.
People forget that, right? Just because it didn't pass the first time doesn't mean it was not a good idea. But because it failed, doesn't mean we need to go and, you know, swoop in and create some other way to do it. So right now, I mean, where you sit today, but it could be different by the time you do this. My sense is that between now and August, the August election will hold with 40, and then what happens between 2023 and 2027, you know, I think.
Who knows?
Yeah. You want to read some tea leaves? I don't know. Yeah.
Who knows?
But I also, as an entrepreneur, what I do is I think about, like, you could wake up, if you're in the business of real estate, you could wake up and be like, well, today the interest rate is, you know, 6 points higher than it was 2 years ago. And so I'm just not going to try to sell a house. You could do that. Or you could wake up and say, you know what, I'm going to have to work with the clients that I have and find probably a smaller house to be able to fit the budget that we're in. Right? And so I think that same approach as mayor. I think a lot of people that are current legislators or current state senators, they sort of wake up every day and think like, okay, what's the state law? What's the national law? I just want to wake up and be angry all day about that. And instead of saying, like, what can I actually get done today based on the environment that we're operating in? And I think that's how entrepreneurs think. We think as, like, what can I do today, not what can I use to make an excuse to do nothing.
Right. I'm gonna ask you a definition of this word.
Yeah.
Was I think is a word that many of us are using. It's kind of a buzzword.
Yes.
But I think I come to understand that it may mean something different to different people depending on what we're talking about. And that word is equity.
Yeah.
You know, we live in a city where, you know, many people believe it's two different cities. Even though it's the it city, but it may not be for me and it may be for you, vice versa, right? Some believe it's a place where the the wealthy to come and play and do their thing, and some believe it's for others who struggling, can't get that affordable housing, don't have the mobility to get around, can't make that quality of life or living wage. So what is that word we need to eat?
In what context?
Just any context, yeah.
Yeah,
just
so
when
I
you
think
about
of it.
equity, what is that come
Yeah, so what comes, I guess the first image that comes to mind for me is, I think probably a lot of people have seen this cartoon of 3 kids wanting to watch I think it's a baseball game, right? And as a former teacher, I think the term is scaffolding, right? Scaffolding the steps that they need so that they can actually see over and see the game.
Right.
So does that mean that everyone is standing on exactly the same height? Does equal mean that everybody's standing on a 1-foot box? No. Equal means we built a box so that everyone can see over, right? So in the context perhaps of reading, right? There we would say the goal, the seeing over the line, is being able to read.
Right.
And so the supports that we may need to give to each of those students are not the same. Some student may need 2 hours of tutoring a week, and some students may need no additional tutoring a week, but to get them to the goal of being able to see or to be able to read, that is where that's to me where equity is coming in. I know for people who are listening who can't see it, but you've seen this cartoon.
Yeah,
I
think that was a good depiction, visualization for people to see. If not, you can Google it. You'll see it. When I want to throw this back at you too. When I think about equity as well, I always think about what does that mean systemically. How do we create equity on a systemic level? We know in this country, just like the state, that there is systemic racism, this systemic discrimination. Things are just rooted in this systemic issues. It's not an individual, it's a person, but it's a system a lot of times that we're trying to fight, combat, address. How do you combat systemic problems that affect people, albeit different levels, but affect everyone essentially on different levels? How do you combat, address, or how do you tackle those issues, whether it's in education, whether it's in housing, whether it's in homelessness, whether it's in transit? We know a mayor can't make laws or statutes and create some policy or put policy out there, or just your voice in general was a lot of times, especially in Nashville when we're a mayor-led city. So talk to us about that and your thoughts on combating systemic issues and things that have been historically just rooted in systemic racism, discrimination, just issues and neglected the system as well.
Yeah. Well, I think what leaders do is at every turn you speak up, because systems, businesses do not have ethics. People have ethics. People work in business or government, right? So I can think about when I joined the board of WPLN NPR here in town. I think it was 2015 or 2016. Oh yes, it was after Trump's election, so I chose 2016. Am I right? Something like that. Anyways, it was a while ago. I'm no longer on the board, but I was served 2 terms, so I was on there for 6 years. And I frequently receive this phone call in town. We want this to be bipartisan. And I'll say, oh, so you're calling me because I'm a Republican? Yeah. I'll say, there are more Republicans in town. But when I joined the board, I think it's something like a 22-member board by bylaws, right? Of a radio station that one would say, oh, they're a liberal bastion of, they're thoughtful and they know what they're doing. Do you know how many Black people were on the board? 0. So here, the Republican girl who's asked to be there to be the Republican, I said, who else are we missing? Thank you for asking me to be at this table, but who else are we missing? Yeah. And so then I said, why did we not call 100 Black men in Middle Tennessee? What's that? How do we choose the board? Well, we ask board members to invite other board people. Now, this is the former leader. We have a whole new leader, a whole new board. It is a totally different day. Sure. But actually takes sitting at the table and raising your hand and then starting to call people. And the first 2 in that period of time where there was 0 Black or brown people on the board, was Alice raising her hand and saying, I'll start calling people. I'll start interviewing people.
Right.
And then I'll nominate people, right? And I know people look at you like, well, how come she's doing that? How come the girl over here, and this, I confronted this also in business school when I worked on this Gay Fine by Me project. They were like, you're a heterosexual white woman married to an army doctor working for a Republican senator. How come you're the person saying it's fine to be gay? I was like, because I can. I have like every privilege.
Right.
So the same thing like with Fort Negley, exactly the same thing. And I've written about this as well. The state law that protected historical assets of my ancestors on the Confederate side, and like a lot of people's family trees, got people on both sides, was being used to protect certain statues in Memphis, but it wasn't being used to protect the same land here in Nashville, right? And so it's the same kind of a thing to say, I see that wrong application, and I'm going to get 5,000 people to sign a petition to stop this nonsense, right? So I would say that, like, when we talk about ideas of change, you have to start with, where am I sitting today, and have I demonstrated that bravery to raise your hand and be brand new on a board and go like, hey, I don't think this is okay.
Right.
You know, like, should we, what could we do about it? I'll do something about it.
When you, I'm glad you brought this up and
Yeah.
my points, being self-identified with puppy.
Yeah.
Right. We're in Nashville.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
On the surface and in between the cracks, many
Yeah.
people will say, hey, this is very progressive liberal Democrats.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How does that maybe affect how voters look at you? You know, some people may just look at Republicans in a box and say, all Republicans are this way, all Democrats are that way. What message would you say to those voters? Only to unpack that, because I know that Republicans doesn't mean that you're a particular way all the time on every single issue, from the loudest Republicans in our nation or in our state. Same thing will come to Democrats or independents or people in between. So I want to give you that opportunity.
Of different faith backgrounds are not all
So I
the
want to
same.
give you the opportunity to unpack that for those who may just say, oh, Alice is a Republican, therefore she can't leave Nashville.
Yeah. Well, I would actually say right now, you know, we have elected for decades the same kind of people with the same qualifications, and we found ourselves as the most taxed city in the state, with the most more debt than the entire state of Tennessee. So if we want to keep getting the same result, we can keep doing the same thing, or maybe we want to give somebody else a try. I would say on the party and the partisan issues, it is, I think people on both sides would say this, there are so many people in public life today that believe their job is to make a speech and get some number of likes and clicks and not to actually get a result. Senator Alexander, his last term in office, he called and asked me to help him with his reelection. And he said the reason he wanted to run for a third term was to reauthorize No Child Left Behind. It was a law that people could see was broken, it had flaws in it, and he believed that he could pull together both the legislation and the support to get it done. So in 2015, he did. That law passed 85-12. A Republican senator from Tennessee authored it, and it was signed by President Obama. That is only the third time in the history of the United States that we've rewritten federal education law. So 85-12, right? That is, I sort of think, what's the idea? And same with getting around with regional mayors. How do we get enough people with us so that we can actually get it done? If we keep going to the legislature with ideas that only are going to get 9 votes, we're not going to get anywhere, right? So Senator Alexander's opioid legislation passed 99-1. Opioid epidemic crosses all socioeconomic groups, all racial groups, all political parties. So why did it take a Republican to get 99 votes? 99 votes. Right? That's crazy. 4 years ago, President Trump at the time signed that into law. So I don't think that there is necessarily, I think people should look at the person.
Okay.
And I think that they should say, does that person understand what the job is? Are they clear-headed that they know, I'm not going to have at City Hall a pro-life rally, not going to have a pro-choice rally. We're going to have a pro-taking out the trash rally, pro-first graders reading rally, pro-filling the potholes rally. Like, it's very clear to me what the job is, and that engaging in these national political fights or trying to outdo, like, oh, we want to do a bigger thing than what San Francisco is doing. That's actually not useful for Nashville, right? You have to say, how does our state work? How do I get that job done? And, you know, and I think I, you know, have people, and you can go to my website, or Republicans and independents and Democrats kind of saying, like, yeah, right now we need a different kind of person to help us get through this.
Right. Now, thank you for, like, just articulating that, because, again, like, even myself, I like talking to people from all different perspectives.
Yeah.
And some people have agendas. Some people just want a person from this side, and some just want a person from that side.
Yeah.
I want everybody from all sides, because I don't think people are that simple. I think it's more complex than that.
Mm-hmm.
And you only know when you talk to someone. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I get it now. Or, oh, okay,
Yeah.
you don't feel the same type of Democratic or Republican way about this particular issue. And so I'm glad that you was able to
Yeah.
be transparent about that, but also give listeners and watchers and voters,
Yeah.
potential voters, the opportunity to hear that directly
Yeah.
from you.
Well, and also I think in some ways they can hold me completely accountable, right? Because you actually don't realize it, but frequently, like, think about this vote on the RNC,
Right.
which precipitated a lot of challenges.
Right.
So people would say, oh, she's going to want to have one that says, like, anti-DNC. Absolutely not, right? Is she going to show up and meet whoever the president is, or her transportation secretary from whatever party? Absolutely, right? Like, this sort of idea, you know, I think viewers, my undergrad, I was at Stanford University, and when I was there, they switched from it was called the techies and the fuzzies, you know, which side you were on, like either the engineering people or the non-engineering people.
Right.
And a faculty member from the techies became the president of the university while I was there, and everyone on the fuzzy side was deeply suspicious he was going to cut funding for, you know, history and all these other things. But because he was so closely watched, I think he actually did more, right? So I would tell listeners to look at, like, the mayor of Oklahoma City, right? That is the sort of model that I would put myself into. Like, put it completely aside and stay focused on the job.
Perfect. Thank you. And I want to go back to something that's happening currently with the Titan State, right? You know, billions of dollars. We know, like, the Tigers are going to make a lot of money from that. I don't know what that is going to look like for Nashville.
Yeah.
And the residents and the quality of life. Is it going to improve the stadium? I'm not sure. But what are your thoughts? I know we got a vote coming up tomorrow. Today. Is today Tuesday?
I think the 25th is the April 25th. I think.
Yeah, I think they're talking about it. I can't.
Yeah.
But
I think April 25th is the final vote, because in my understanding, it has to be voted up or down before April 27th, which is when the state of Metro is, and that at that point in time, if it is not in the budget, they can't consider any new capital projects. So I'm very conflicted about the Titans stadium situation. I have
what's conflicting about it?
what is conflicting about it? Yeah, I and actually talked to my team too, because I came out March 7th or 8th at this first mayoral forum that I went to, and I was in the camp of, like, I'm for it because we're getting 100 acres back in the urban core, and when else can you do that? But then as I unraveled it further, and I think what you're seeing, there's 30 amendments on it on April 27th, because I think as people start to unravel it more, you become more conflicted about it, right? Why are we going for another new stadium? And I know that the sort of, like, all the financial engineering, everybody's like, oh no, it doesn't really count. But at the end of the day, it is more debt. At the end of the day, you only have so many dollars in your wallet. And let's say there's 7 Titans games a year, home games, maybe. I think that's about right. Something like that. And there's 60,000 seats maybe, and maybe 20,000 of them are filled with Davidson County residents, but probably not. It's probably less than that, you know. So we're talking about tying up like $1 billion for that group, and we're not talking about our sidewalks, right? And we had 49 pedestrian deaths last year, 400 pedestrian injuries. Yeah. I see Heart's the lady that raised me. She lives in Bellevue, and she no longer can drive. And I worry about her walking on her street because there's no sidewalk, right? And I don't think, and that's the sort of place where I think, is that actually the only way to get those 100 acres back for the city? I don't know. Yeah, so I am, I would say, to be continued in the unpacking, and then actually, if it doesn't pass, and I would say my next sort of long form press interview is May 4th with the Tennessean, and that will have a very clear position at that point, because we'll know, did it go through or did it not? Yeah, and I'm not trying to skirt it, but I'm just trying to say, see 30 amendments on it. This, you
talked about budget kind of midway through, and I always try to tell people as much as I can, educate them, just want to do maybe some say maybe one, some may say two, like top priorities of the mayor, right? Mm-hmm. It's a year-long thing, the long process. We all see at the end, like, oh, okay, education's getting this, transportation's getting this, public sector's getting this, and everybody's like, we should give them 1 year, give them, and that's always a trouble, right? Can you give us a background of your budget experience, and how you would take on the budget to be transparent, and also work with community, right? And making sure, as potential mayor, you have a clear understanding of what resources need to be allocated there, here. When the reason I think it's important, because it's a huge job of the mayor, but I don't think many people are really educated or aware of how crucial it is, and the process, and just knowing if the next person who may be mayor understands it as well.
Yeah. So I think one of your questions was general experience. I mean, a budget is, I guess you could start. I have an MBA from Darden at the University of Virginia. I graduated in the top 10% of my class. So do I have this sort of like academic ability and understanding about how to build and execute against a budget? Yes. I would say in terms of government budgeting, I had 7 different program directors reported to me when I was an assistant commissioner in economic development, from everything as diverse as, this really boondoggle program that was passed by the previous administration that we inherited and had to manage, a state-sponsored venture capital program, to like the National Flood Insurance Program, which, underwrites like, I think, 30,000 homeowners in the state of Tennessee, right? Oh. So like federal and state budget experience, individual company, had private equity investors at different companies.
What's the biggest budget, I guess because I think our budget, almost $3 billion or something like that. So what is your, I guess, experience with that as far as dollar amount? In my portfolios, we probably were right at $700 million. Okay. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, money, millions of dollars.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, and we were obviously part of, the state budget process. At the time, the state budget was, I think, $37 billion. It's now like $52 billion. Okay. I don't mean this the wrong way, but I think I'm not sure. I'm not sure that there's a sense of like, in some ways, someone who walks in and is managing a budget of a certain size may not actually have the same level of understanding, probably like as a small business owner, right? Like you have to actually know how everything fits together. Right. But if you were sort of a cog in a giant machine, you might just know your one little piece, right? Exactly. And so I think sort of being like comparing people's budgets. I'm not really sure.
And the reason I ask about the budget, especially with elected officials, because like that's a really important, like if not the most important, especially job with the mayor, because again, understanding what one's mind is thinking about how they approach the budget. But also, I see the mayor's office as like a corridor to cotton to like, how are you connecting resources, right? To the community, right? And that's kind of how like I want to kind of end this like kind of conversation about preservation and balance, right? With economic growth. Excuse me, in economic growth, we have a growing city. You know, businesses are coming, people are coming, still 80 people a day still over here. But you have people like myself, like yourself, are native, been born and raised here, that still want to live here, still want to keep that soul of Nashville. But we understand growth is here. As a potential mayor, how do you kind of find that yin and yang between preservation and making sure Nashville stays Nashville, but also it's a place where it can still effectively and grow in a sustainable place and a healthy place where people can still have a great high quality of life?
Yeah, well, I think the chamber, I sent some information, I could be wrong, but I actually think we're forecasted to lose population over the next 5 years. Not a huge number, but I think our out-migration will exceed our in-migration by about 4,000 residents.
Okay.
So that might rethink only, and they are moving to our neighboring counties because of the taxes. Like, and so, but the question of, but your question of how could you maintain parts of Nashville? So here's one of the things that's probably hardest for a lot of us. All of these businesses that are closing shop. Taxes. Taxes. They're leaving. And, you know, and then I would say probably too, they're looking at an asset that has appreciated a lot if they own the real estate underneath it. If they don't own the real estate underneath it, they're probably leaving because of being priced out in the market. If they own the real estate underneath it, they're probably getting
more money than they ever seen.
Yeah, and they're going to take it, right? Like that's it. I mean, people are economically motivated, right? When we talk about all of these issues, and I know I'm like back to like we need more housing to bring the price down. We need less taxes to bring the prices down.
Well, the thing, but you know, it's like, how are we going to afford it? How are we going to pay for that? Like, I think that's like a lot of times the biggest question.
Well, I think, we
got all these great ideas.
Yeah.
How are we going to afford it?
Yeah, and so I would say like the death of a lot of small or growing businesses is trying to be everything to everyone. And I would posit that we saw this when we came in Governor Haslam's term. We actually, the department that I did the top to bottom review for, we cut about 40% of the positions, and we go like, oh my God, we cut these positions, right? Yeah. But it was a function that was actually being done in the private sector. Most of those people ended up going into the private sector as a planning function that was sort of questionable why state government should even be in this business. And it was a whole series of issues. And then the people that were there, we were actually able to pay them more and attract better people and get for successive years in a row, unprecedented State of the Year in Economic Development awards. And so I know it may sound counterintuitive, but I think that there's a little bit of a figure out what we need to be doing, or stop doing the things we don't need to be doing. It's very clear that there are plenty of employment opportunities, right? And it's very clear too that if we've got 200 vacancies in our police force and we're losing people, we're gonna need to raise the pay there, right? So I think in the teaching side, right, our number of administrators have grown following national trends too at this explosive rate, but our number of teachers haven't, right? And so our teachers that are still there are like, hey, my class size is still 35 people and I'm out of there because of like the pay and the work conditions, right? And we just layered on all these administrators. 2/3 of our budget for our schools doesn't go to something that's happening in the classrooms. Right? Yeah, it's going, so I think it's taking a kind of like, let's start with zero-based budgeting, which says, who are the kids, who are the students, what do we actually need?
Right.
And then decide if the other things need to happen, right? Who are the police officers that we need? What's public safety? You know, versus sort of taking the approach of, well, we've always done it this way. Right. We can't change it. And so I know some people will hear that as like, oh, she's in there, she's going to like cut the whole thing in half and the world's going to come to an end, right? But I would posit, like, look at FedEx. And so for your listeners that are not Tennessee natives like we are, we know that FedEx is in Memphis. And we know that the Memphis airport is the second busiest air cargo hub in the world after only Hong Kong. What did FedEx do to the world? We have the U.S. Postal Service. We love our postal carriers. We love our postal service. I love sending Christmas cards in the mail. Right. But the Postal Service for generations told us we couldn't track our mail. It wasn't possible. It took FedEx coming in and being like, you can't.
Right.
It is actually possible. We got to think differently. We got to do this differently. Postal Service is still there.
Right.
And now we can track our mail.
Right.
So I guess I would just sort of say maybe it's sort of attacking the problem a little bit differently. And actually I think, anyways.
As we close, I want to give you an opportunity to, one, kind of reiterate your vision, for Nashville, and what that looks like under your administration, if elected. And then where can people go to support you, your campaign, or follow up, and unpack some of these things that they may hear us talking about with you.
Well, first part of that is AliceRolli.com, and Alice@AliceRolli.com. Email, it's there, and there's also, Twitter and Facebook and all the things, but just go there, AliceRolli.com. You can donate. That would be great. Campaigns are expensive. Let's see. So the Nashville is a Nashville that we, just like my great-grandfather left in Nashville, that I wanted to come back to. I want my great-grandkids and yours to want to come back here, or want to live here, or want to stay here and be able to find a job that can pay the bills.
Okay.
Right? To be able to have...
How far back Nashville we talking?
What do you mean?
Well,
yeah.
I couldn't swim in Centennial Pool.
Yeah.
So, but I get your point.
That's fair. Yeah. That's a fair...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we have to choose Nashville 1998.
Something like that.
That was the first year that we were not under a federal desegregation or court order.
Okay.
Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay.
That works.
That's pretty recent, though.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad that it's that recent, right?
Well, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
For a whole other day.
Yeah.
But I'll put it to you like this. If me and you was in the elevator, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know you, you didn't know me. Well, maybe I did know you. Maybe I didn't use running from there. And I say, hey, why should I vote for you?
Mm-hmm.
And, we got 30 seconds on the elevator.
Yeah.
Maybe a little longer, depending on what floor I'm going to. What would you tell?
Yeah. That we can be a city that can buck every national trend that says big cities must be filled with crime. Big cities must be filled with the shells of companies that used to be there that left. And that big cities need to believe that all kids cannot have a great school. Mm-hmm. So I want to buck that trend for Nashville when we move from being a medium city to a big city, because that's happening, right? And actually be able to deliver on a vision that says we can be different, because we have been different, right? This is the city that delivered women everywhere the right to vote. It shouldn't be the city that women believe they cannot walk to their car safely, right? This is the city that the volunteer spirit is alive.
Right.
This is a city, so this red-blue war, we can be a city that can say, hey, actually we can work together, because most of our funding for our most vulnerable residents is state or federal funding.
Right.
So being in a constant state of war with our state and then all three of our federal congressmen are Republicans. Both of our United States senators are Republicans. So what if we sort of approached it as solving the problem instead of having a fight? And so that's the city that I believe that we could be.
Be solution-based.
Yep.
Well, Alice, I appreciate your time. I enjoyed this conversation. And I know the people listening and watching is going to enjoy this a lot better than your 2 minutes here and there.
Maybe, yeah.
But no, thank you. Good luck on the campaign. It's almost here. Early voting will be here July before we know it.
I know.
So then it'll be August, and
Yeah.
go. So
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
and thank you for your commitment to this social change, and wanting to make your home, my own, a better home for everybody that's currently living here. So
Thank you. Thanks, Jerome. All right.